Captain Lyra Vance stood in the cramped operations room, eyes fixed on the hollow display in front of her. Her fingers hovered over the touch-sensitive controls, but there was nothing she could do to undo the mess that had just unfolded. The mission was supposed to be simple, a silent sabotage, a quiet message to the Zakhtar, and then slip back into the shadows. But things never went as planned, did they? The briefing had been clear: infiltrate the Zakhtar's diplomatic meeting, plant the virus, and withdraw. A subtle message to remind them that Earth was not to be trifled with. But now, a prominent Zakhtar diplomat, the one who'd spearheaded the peace negotiations, lay dead, killed by a single bullet. The mission had spiraled out of control. Lyra exhaled sharply, her mind racing. One bullet, and it's all gone to hell. She could still hear the moment in her head, the thick hum of the comms, the eerie quiet as her sniper's crosshairs aligned with the target. Then, a moment of hesitation. A flinch. The shot had been perfect, but it had missed the mark, not the diplomat's heart, but his neck. A lethal, clean shot, but not enough to incapacitate him. The man had screamed, and for a second, Lyra had felt her pulse hammering in her chest. She'd lost her focus, the plans slipping away with it. "Captain Vance?" came the voice of her second-in-command, Lieutenant Marco, cutting through the tension. "We've got a problem." Lyra turned, meeting his anxious gaze. Marco's face was pale, the usual calmness gone. The data pads in his hands trembled slightly. "What happened?" Lyra asked, her voice tight. "Transmission from the Zakhtar Council," Marco said, as he placed the pad on the table. "They've tracked the kill. They're aware of the mission. They're demanding retribution." Lyra frowned. "Retribution?" Her heart dropped. The Zakhtar were notorious for their strict code of justice, swift and unyielding. They would not tolerate even a small infraction, let alone an assassination. "Yes," Marco continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "And there's more. They want the responsible parties surrendered to face judgment. And if we don't comply, well, they've made it clear, they will wipe us off the map." Lyra's mind raced as she processed the gravity of the situation. The Zakhtar were no strangers to violence, but the idea of facing their retribution on their terms was terrifying. If they didn't comply, Earth would be left with no choice but to retaliate, and that would lead to full-scale war. "We're not giving anyone up," Lyra said, her tone icy. "Not after everything we've worked for." Marco nodded, though it was clear he was uncertain. "What do we do now, Captain?" Lyra glanced at the hollow screen, where the transmission from the Zakhtar had started to loop. A booming, authoritative voice filled the room, cold and mechanical. "United Earth, you have committed an act of aggression. The laws of the galaxy demand your compliance. Surrender the human responsible, or face the consequences." Lyra didn't flinch. She knew what was coming. The diplomat was dead. There was no way to undo it, no way to reverse the chain of events that had been set in motion. But the question remained, would she take the fall for it, or would she fight? "We can't afford to make this a full-blown war," Marco added quietly. "The whole galaxy's watching. The Zakhtar have already spoken, their wrath will be devastating." Lyra's eyes narrowed. The thought of backing down wasn't something she could stomach. Not when Earth had already invested so much in maintaining a delicate balance of power. "We're not backing down," Lyra said again, her voice firmer this time. "We'll use this to our advantage." "But, Captain," Marco began, concern lacing his voice, "the Council's already mobilizing. They're preparing their forces, and they have allies. If we don't give up the team—" Lyra held up a hand to stop him. "I don't care what the Council's preparing. They want to see us bend? Not going to happen. If they think we're afraid of them, they're wrong." She turned toward the comms desk, her fingers already moving to issue orders. "Send word to command. We need backup, and we need it fast. Get the team ready. We're finishing what we started." Marco hesitated before speaking again. "What exactly are you planning, Captain?" Lyra's eyes locked with his, a sharp edge of determination in her gaze. "We'll hit them before they can react. If they want war, we'll give them war. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the weight of her words. Marco's gaze softened, but only for a moment, before he nodded. Understood. We're with you, Captain. Lyra turned her attention back to the holoscreen, her thoughts already racing ahead. A part of her knew that taking the fight to the Zakthar was a gamble, a dangerous one. But if she had to risk everything to protect Earth, so be it. There was no turning back now. She knew the road ahead would be filled with bloodshed, but that was the price of peace sometimes, hard, brutal, and unforgiving. Get the team together, Lyra said, her voice now resolute. And make no mistake, we're going to finish the job. If the Zakthar want to bring their justice down on us, we'll make sure they remember why they never should have crossed Earth. As she stood, the gravity of the situation settled into her chest. But there was no time for hesitation. No time to second-guess herself. She had a mission to complete. The galaxy might think they could dictate the fate of humanity, but Lyra had other plans. The countdown had already begun. The tension in the war room was palpable as Lyra Vance stood at the center, staring at the glowing holoscreen that had been transmitting the Zakthar's ultimatum for the past hour. The words were clear, chilling, and relentless: surrender the responsible party or face obliteration. Lyra's pulse quickened as she read the message again. The Zakthar were not playing games. They had never been known for mercy, and now, Earth stood at the edge of a precipice. The room was filled with hushed voices as her team gathered around her. Lieutenant Marco, as usual, stood closest to her, his brow furrowed in thought. The rest of her command staff, Sergeant Griggs, Lieutenant Harris, and the rest of the tactical team, waited for Lyra to speak, their faces tense with the weight of the decision ahead. Lyra paced slowly, her boots clicking against the metal floor. Every step felt heavier than the last, the sound echoing like a ticking clock. She had been in countless life-or-death situations, but this was different. The choice before her wasn't just about survival. It was about the survival of humanity. The Zakthar were demanding one thing: surrender. The very thought of it gnawed at her. Captain, Marco's voice broke through her thoughts. What are we going to do? Lyra stopped pacing and turned to face him. We don't surrender, she said firmly, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. We can't afford to show weakness now. Harris, one of her youngest officers, spoke up hesitantly. But Captain, they're not just a threat, they're a promise. She glanced at the screen. The Council has already mobilized. We've seen their forces in action. They'll crush us without a second thought if we don't comply. Lyra's gaze hardened. We fight back. We make them regret ever thinking they could bring us to our knees. Griggs, who had been quiet up until now, gave a low chuckle. And what's the plan, Captain? Charge into their fleet with nothing but our fists? His tone wasn't mocking, but rather filled with genuine concern. We don't need to charge headfirst into the fleet, Lyra said, a slight smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. We hit them where it hurts, their leadership. They're already making moves on Earth, trying to force our hand. We'll show them that we don't take threats lightly. Marco's eyes widened. You're saying we take out the leadership? Lyra nodded slowly. Exactly. If we target their command structure, we weaken their grip. A strike at their heart will send a message. We don't have time to wait for them to make the first move. We take the initiative. Griggs crossed his arms, his face unreadable. It's risky, Captain. If we miss, or if we fail, the Zakthar won't hesitate to retaliate in full force. I'm aware of the risks, Lyra replied, her tone sharp. But sitting back and doing nothing isn't an option. We make the first move, we control the narrative. There was a long silence in the room as her team processed her words. It was a bold plan, one that would undoubtedly lead to severe consequences if it failed. But Lyra had never been one to hesitate. If Earth was going to survive, they needed to make a stand. The Zakthar were ruthless, but humans were nothing if not resilient. We'll need a precise strike, Marco said, breaking the silence. One that doesn't just target their leadership, but cripples it. Lyra nodded. Exactly. We get in, we get out. No mess. The less noise, the better. The Zakthar might be powerful, But they're not infallible. Sergeant Griggs raised an eyebrow. And how do you propose we sneak past their defenses? They're watching us, Captain. They know who we are. We'll be ghosts, Lyra said, her eyes glinting with determination. We'll hit them in their weak spots. We have intelligence that says their main command ship is vulnerable to a precise strike. We slip in, do the damage, and leave before they even realize what hit them. Harris raised her hand tentatively. Do we have the resources for this? The fleet will be on high alert after what happened. And even if we do make it to their ship, how do we plan on taking down their leadership? Lyra turned to her, her expression softening. We have the resources. We have the technology. And as for the leadership, we don't have to kill them. We just need to make them understand that crossing Earth is a mistake. A very costly one. Griggs let out a low whistle. You really think we can pull this off? Lyra met his gaze with unshaken confidence. We don't have a choice. The room fell into another brief silence, the weight of the plan settling over them. Lyra could feel the uncertainty creeping into the air, but she didn't let it show. It was her job to guide them through this. She had to convince them, as much as herself, that this was the only way forward. All right, Marco said after a moment, his voice steady. We'll need the best from everyone. This won't be easy, but it's our only shot. Lyra nodded. Exactly. We're going to make them pay for every threat they've leveled against us. We'll show the galaxy that humanity isn't afraid to fight back. Harris looked at her, a mixture of fear and resolve in her eyes. If we fail. We won't fail, Lyra interrupted. Failure isn't an option. We've come too far for that. Her words hung in the air, heavy with the reality of the situation. There was no turning back now. The Zakthar had made their move, and Earth had to respond. Gather the team, Lyra ordered, her voice firm once more. We leave in 20 minutes. Make it count. As her team dispersed to prepare, Lyra stood still for a moment longer, her mind sharp and focused. The stakes had never been higher. The Zakthar had thrown down the gauntlet, and now it was up to her and her team to pick it up and fight back. The war had begun. The briefing room was quieter than usual, the usual hum of activity replaced by a tense silence. Lyra stood at the head of the table, watching her team assemble. Each officer was dressed in the familiar combat gear of the United Earth Forces, their expressions a mix of determination and anxiety. The stakes were higher now. This wasn't just another mission. This was Earth's future on the line. Lyra took a deep breath, steeling herself before she spoke. All right, everyone. This is it. We've been given an ultimatum, and there's no backing down. The Zakthar think they can push us into submission, but they're wrong. She paused, letting her words sink in. She could feel the weight of their gazes on her, the unspoken trust they placed in her leadership. This wasn't just a tactical operation, it was a fight for humanity's survival. We're not surrendering, Lyra continued, her voice steady, unwavering. We're not giving up 1 inch of this planet. We're taking the fight to them, and we're going to show the Zakthar what Earth is really capable of. Marco, standing to her right, spoke first. Captain, the Council has already begun moving their forces toward Earth. They're making it clear they want to make an example of us. Their fleet is massive, and we're not exactly equipped for a full-scale battle. Lyra met his gaze, unflinching. I know. But we're not going to fight them head-on. That's not the plan. We've been given 1 shot, 1 chance to hit them hard and fast. We strike at their leadership, cripple their command, and make them question whether attacking Earth is worth the cost. Harris, always quick to question the risks, stepped forward. And how exactly do you plan on getting past their defenses? We know they've been monitoring us since the diplomat's assassination. They're expecting something from us. If we move on their fleet, they'll have us pinned down before we even get close. Lyra turned to Harris, her mind already working through the details. We don't attack their fleet. We're going to their command ship, the Vekthar, where the leadership is coordinating the assault on Earth. It's vulnerable, heavily guarded, but not invincible. We've already mapped out their weak points. We hit fast, hard, and then disappear before they even have a chance to react. Griggs, ever the skeptic, leaned forward, his arms crossed. You're talking about going in blind. You've got no backup, no reinforcements. If something goes wrong, we're stuck with the consequences. Lyra's eyes narrowed. Then we make sure it doesn't go wrong. We'll have a team of the best we've got, and we'll execute this with precision. It's not about brute force, it's about knowing exactly where to strike. She glanced at her team, each one of them nodding in agreement. The resolve was there. They were ready, even if they had doubts. Lyra didn't blame them for being hesitant. This mission was unlike any they'd ever faced before, but she knew they had no other choice. The Zathar had made their move, and now it was time for Earth to make its stand. We leave in 1 hour, Lyra said, breaking the silence that had fallen over the room. Prepare your gear. This is a go. As her team dispersed to prepare, Lyra remained at the front of the room, her thoughts racing. The Zathar were a force to be reckoned with. Their military technology was far more advanced than anything humanity had ever encountered. But Lyra had something they didn't: Earth's ingenuity, the ability to adapt in ways the Zathar couldn't predict. If they had any hope of surviving this war, they needed to outthink their enemies, not just outfight them. The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. The hum of the ship's engines grew louder as Lyra's team readied themselves for the operation. Their mission was simple: infiltrate the Vecthar, eliminate or neutralize the Zathar leadership, and escape before they could be traced. The plan was risky, almost too risky, but Lyra couldn't afford to second-guess herself. Her mind kept returning to the same thought: if we fail here, there is no going back. The shuttle was prepped, the weapons checked, and the escape routes mapped. The rest of Earth's forces were preparing to defend against any counterattack, but Lyra's mission had to be surgical. There could be no delays, no mistakes. As she stepped into the shuttle's cockpit, Marcos sat beside her, his fingers flying over the controls. The rest of the team, armed and ready, were strapped in behind them, their faces grim. Harris and Griggs exchanged quiet words in the back, the tension between them palpable. Lyra could hear their murmurs, but she focused on the task ahead. Approaching the target zone in 15 minutes, Marcos said, his voice calm despite the storm brewing outside. Lyra nodded. Everyone's ready? There was a collective murmur of confirmation from the back. Each person was prepared, each one fully aware of the stakes. Good, Lyra said, tightening her grip on the console. We're doing this for Earth. For our people. The shuttle jerked slightly as it entered the outer rim of the Zathar's defensive perimeter. The glowing outlines of the Vecthar loomed large ahead, its sleek, imposing structure a testament to the alien race's technological superiority. Lyra's heart beat faster. They were close now. They were about to make history. Here we go, Lyra muttered to herself. Hold tight. The shuttle surged forward, the hum of the engines growing louder as they rocketed toward the massive alien ship. On the view screen, the Vecthar grew larger with every passing second. The silence in the shuttle was deafening, broken only by the soft buzz of communication systems. The first part of the plan was simple: breach the outer defenses and enter through a maintenance bay. The Vecthar's security system would be focused on defending against external threats, not internal sabotage. They would use that to their advantage. Marco's voice crackled over the intercom. We're in. Maintenance bay is clear. Moving to phase 2. Lyra nodded sharply. Let's move. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud. The team quickly disembarked, moving with swift, practiced efficiency. They weren't soldiers today, they were ghosts, moving through the shadows, unseen, unnoticed. The plan was unfolding perfectly, but Lyra's gut twisted. She knew it wouldn't be this easy. The Vecthar's command center was just ahead, and she could already feel the pressure building. Every step they took brought them closer to the leadership, closer to the moment where everything could go terribly wrong. But there was no turning back. Not now. Not ever. The corridors of the Vecthar were silent as Lyra's team moved swiftly through the ship, their footsteps muffled against the sleek metallic floors. The faint hum of the ship's power systems resonated in the background, an ever-present reminder of the alien fortress they were infiltrating. They had made it past the outer defenses with surprising ease, but the further they ventured, the more Lyra felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. There was no room for error now. No second chances. Every decision they made in the next few minutes would either cripple the Zakhtar or seal humanity's fate. "Clear," Griggs whispered as he checked the corner ahead, his weapon held low and ready. Lyra nodded, keeping her own weapon close. The hallway stretched out before them, leading to the ship's command center, where the heart of the operation lay. They had no idea what awaited them inside. The Zakhtar were methodical, and any weakness they exposed would likely be covered up within minutes. The leadership they were after was a moving target, and the time they had was dwindling. "We're close," Lyra said quietly, her voice low but firm. "Stay sharp." They reached the door to the command center. It was massive, designed to keep intruders out with reinforced locking mechanisms and heavy-duty security. Marco approached the terminal beside the door, his fingers moving quickly as he hacked into the system. 10 seconds, Marco muttered, his eyes scanning the screen. Lyra felt her heartbeat quicken. She didn't have time for mistakes, not now, not with everything they had fought for. The entire plan had come down to this moment, this one strike. The Zakhtar had forced Earth into a corner, and if they didn't act now, the planet would be at their mercy. The door finally slid open with a low hiss. Marco gave a small, satisfied nod. "We're in." The command center was eerily quiet, lit only by the soft glow of holographic consoles and screens. There were no soldiers in sight, only a handful of Zakhtar officers gathered around a central table, discussing strategy in hushed tones. They didn't notice the team immediately. Lyra motioned for her squad to fan out, moving to take strategic positions around the room. "We're in position," Marco said softly into their comms. "What's the plan?" Lyra took a deep breath. "We need to neutralize their leadership and send a message. We don't kill them, not yet. We want them alive, vulnerable." Griggs shot her a look, a slight smirk crossing his face. "You think the Zakhtar will be content with us just scaring them? They'll be content with us sending a message they can't ignore," Lyra replied firmly. "We'll hit them where it hurts. We have to show them Earth is capable of this kind of precision. We're not just going to bend to their will." At that, Lyra moved toward the head of the table, where the highest-ranking Zakhtar officer, High Commander Vrothar, sat, engrossed in the holographic display. His attention was on the screen, but Lyra's team had already closed the distance, keeping to the shadows. "Do it," Lyra said quietly. Marco stepped forward first, moving swiftly to the console in front of the Zakhtar leadership. His fingers flew over the interface, sending a pulse of electricity through the ship's systems to disrupt the flow of data, sending the ship into a temporary blackout. Lights flickered, and the officers jolted upright in alarm. "What the hell?" Vrothar's voice boomed as he stood, his 6 eyes narrowing. Before he could react, Lyra's team moved with practiced precision. Harris and Griggs advanced, weapons raised, keeping the officers at bay. Marco quickly moved to disable the remaining security protocols, while Lyra stood at the center of the room, her gaze fixed on the Zakhtar leader. "You've made a grave mistake, Commander," Lyra said, her voice carrying through the room with chilling authority. "And we're here to make sure you understand the consequences." Vrothar sneered, his elongated limbs twitching in frustration. "You think your tiny human forces can challenge us? You have no idea what you've unleashed. The Zakhtar will destroy you." Lyra stepped forward, never breaking eye contact with the commander. "I'm not here to negotiate. You've pushed us to the brink. Now you're going to see what happens when you try to break us." The tension in the room was thick, the air charged with the anticipation of what was to come. Lyra could feel her pulse in her ears, the gravity of the situation hanging heavy. The entire future of Earth rested on this moment. One misstep, and everything would fall apart. "Take them into custody," Lyra commanded, her voice steady. She didn't need to explain further. Marco and Harris moved quickly, securing the Zakhtar officers and neutralizing their ability to send out any distress signals. They would be kept alive, but they were no longer in control. Lyra turned back to Vrothar, who was now glaring at her, fury etched across his alien face. You thought you could make an example of us. Well, now you will be the example. Earth won't fall to you, and it won't bend. You're going to learn that the hard way. Vrothar sneered again, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes now. The Zakthar were used to control, used to bending the will of those they deemed weak. What they hadn't anticipated was that humanity would rise up, that Earth would fight back. You think you've won, human? Vrothar spat, his voice dripping with disdain. You've only just begun to understand what the Zakthar are capable of. Lyra's gaze didn't waver. No, Commander. You haven't begun to understand what Earth is capable of. She stepped forward, bringing her face mere inches from his. This ends now. Your forces won't get any further. Your plans for Earth, your attempts to force us into submission, they stop here. Vrothar remained silent, his fury still palpable but tempered with uncertainty. Lyra could see it in his eyes. He wasn't used to this, a human, standing in front of him, unafraid, unyielding. This wasn't what he had expected. Lyra turned to her team. We've neutralized their leadership. We've sent the message. Now, we get out of here before they can retaliate. As her team moved to evacuate, Lyra's heart pounded. They had taken the first step toward crippling the Zakthar's plans. But the war was far from over. This was only the beginning. With the leadership of the Zakthar under their control, Earth had made its defiant stand. But Lyra knew better than anyone, the hardest part was yet to come. The cold, sterile air inside the Vekthar felt thick with tension as Lyra and her team made their way through the ship's narrow corridors. They were running out of time, and the weight of what they had just done, the capture of the Zakthar leadership, was pressing down on Lyra's shoulders. The calms had gone dark after their attack, and she knew the moment the Zakthar regained control, they would come after them with everything they had. Status report, Lyra ordered, her voice clipped. Marco's voice came through her earpiece. We've disabled the main command systems, but their secondary communication grid is up and running. Expect reinforcements soon. The clock's ticking. We can't afford to wait any longer. Lyra replied, her voice firm. We're getting out now. Griggs turned back to her, his face grim. You sure about this, Captain? You've seen the kind of force the Zakthar can bring. They'll retaliate, and they'll retaliate fast. Lyra nodded, her gaze steady. We've made our point. If they want to escalate, they'll have to deal with Earth. We won't be intimidated. As they neared the hangar bay where their shuttle was waiting, Lyra's mind raced. The mission had gone smoother than expected, but this was the point where everything could fall apart. The Zakthar were formidable, and with their leadership incapacitated, they wouldn't hesitate to make an example of Earth. She glanced at her team, each member focused, their faces set in grim determination. They had come so far, but the hardest part was yet to come. Escape. Stay alert, Lyra ordered. We're not out of this yet. As the team filed into the hangar, Lyra noticed the shuttle sitting quietly in the corner, its engines still warm from the last check. They had prepared for every possible scenario, but they hadn't planned on one thing, the Zakthar's ruthlessness. The ship wasn't just going to let them go. We're clear, Marco said, checking the shuttle's systems. Engines are ready. We can take off whenever you give the word. Lyra hesitated for a moment, her gaze flickering back to the narrow corridor. Get to the shuttle. Now. The team moved swiftly, but before they could board, a blast echoed through the hangar, sending a shockwave across the floor. The lights flickered. The hum of the ship's systems shifted into a low, ominous thrum. The Zakthar were here. Lyra's heart raced. There was no more time to think, no more room for hesitation. They were cornered. A part of her had known it was only a matter of time before the Zakthar retaliated, but now, the reality was far worse than she had imagined. Get in! Now! Lyra shouted, as she sprinted toward the shuttle. The rest of the team followed, weapons drawn, ready for anything. The sound of boots pounding on metal echoed in the hall, followed by the unmistakable whine of Zakthar energy shields powering up. Reinforcements were closing in. Lyra and her team reached the shuttle and climbed inside, but just as the door was closing, a group of Zakthar soldiers stormed into the hangar, weapons raised. Their glowing red eyes fixed on the humans with a deadly focus. "Brace for impact!" Lyra shouted as she slammed the door shut. The shuttle's engines roared to life, but the sound of incoming fire echoed against the hull. Energy blasts hit the shuttle's shields, sending jolts of electric feedback through the walls. "Shields at 50%! Marco yelled over the comms. "We won't last long against that kind of firepower! Full throttle!" Lyra ordered, her voice sharp. "Get us out of here, now!" The shuttle lurched forward, slamming into the protective blast doors that separated the hangar from the rest of the ship. The metal groaned as the shuttle forced its way through, sparks flying as the shields took the brunt of the impact. But they were moving, and that was all that mattered. "All hands brace for reentry!" Marco called out. "We're coming through the atmosphere at max speed!" Lyra gripped the seat, her knuckles white as the shuttle rocketed toward the exit. The Zakthar were relentless, but Lyra wasn't about to let them win. She could feel the heat of the engines pushing them into the atmosphere, the ship's hull vibrating as they broke free from the Vekthar's grasp. The sound of gunfire and explosions faded into the background as the shuttle accelerated, leaving the alien vessel behind. As the shuttle pierced the atmosphere, Lyra allowed herself a brief moment of relief. They had made it. For now. "Status?" Lyra asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Shields holding," Marco reported, his fingers moving quickly across the console. "Engines are stable. We're clear of the Zakthar fleet." Lyra exhaled slowly, but her mind kept turning. The fight wasn't over. The Zakthar would regroup. They would retaliate, but now, Earth had a foothold. Now, they knew that humanity wasn't afraid to take action, to defend what was theirs. "Set a course for Earth," Lyra ordered. "We've got a war to fight." As the shuttle made its way back to their homeworld, the stars outside flickered past, a stark reminder of how fragile their existence was in the vastness of the galaxy. But Lyra wasn't afraid. She wasn't going to let Earth fall. She glanced at her team, their faces worn but resolute. They had done what no one thought was possible. They had struck back, and now the Zakthar would know what humanity was capable of. The Zakthar had made their move, and Earth had responded in kind. But the war was only just beginning. And Lyra knew that Earth would fight with everything it had. "We're not done yet," Lyra said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of the future. "This is only the beginning." The shuttle continued its journey back to Earth, the sound of the engines the only noise in the quiet cabin. They had made their stand. Now, it was time to prepare for what came next.